At the moment they realized that Yang Yi had attained the enlightened sword heart, the expressions from the representatives of all the 6 great powers and the Grand Qin Empire were extremely colorful. Qing Yunzi and Kai Feng's expressions were especially unsightly, as if someone had dug up the grave of their ancestors. The enlightened sword heart. I never expected that Yang Yi has actually attained the enlightened sword sect. Both of them were truly unable to accept this in a short period of time. On the other hand, Yu Heng's expression was slightly strange. It started with shock and excitement before transforming into bitterness and regret. If Yang Yi had merely comprehended sword intent, then even though it was a slight pity that the sword sect had given up on him, it wasn't to the point of making the sword sect feel regretful. However, the enlightened sword heart was different. Not to mention the sword sect, even the origin school would probably feel extremely regretful if it had done something similar. What was the enlightened sword heart? Possessing it was like becoming an emperor of the sword and attaining the ability to destroy all techniques with a single strike of the sword. If Yang Yi was given sufficient time, then an extraordinary expert in the sword would definitely appear in the Southern Territory. At that time, the sword sect would rise in status along with him, and it wasn't impossible for the sword sect to recover to the state it was at during its prime. However, it was all too late now, because Yang Yi wasn't a disciple of the sword sect anymore. And no matter how dazzling Yang Yi was in the future, it would be completely unrelated to the sword sect. When he thought up to here, the bitter expression on Yu Heng's face grew deeper. After this day passed, the higher-ups of the sword sect would become the laughingstock of all the experts in the world, because they'd kicked out a genius who'd comprehended 4th-level sword intent and the enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. So, how stupid would the higher-ups of the sword sect have to be in order to make such an idiotic decision? At this moment, Su Qingshi heaved a light sigh of relief because Yang Yi, who possessed the enlightened sword heart, was finally on equal footing with Yuan Tong. Even if he wasn't able to defeat Yuan Tong, there would be no problem for him to withdraw safely from the battle, because all techniques were useless before Yang Yi. In the crowd, Wenren Yu gazed at Yang Yi while she spoke in a low voice. The enlightened sword heart. Auntie Yu would definitely be extremely happy if she knew. Li Si gazed at Yang Yi and said, I originally thought he was a mere genius in the sword Dao, but it looks like I've underestimated him. He isn't just a genius in the sword Dao but an extraordinary genius in the sword Dao. He has already comprehended 4th-level sword intent before the age of 20, and he has even attained the enlightened sword heart. Such natural talent isn't inferior to the sword sect's founding ancestor from 10,000 years ago. Meanwhile, Bai Qi suddenly said, Now, he has the qualifications to make our Grand Qin Empire be willing to sacrifice some things for him, right? Yes, but the precondition is that he survives the battle, Li Si said in a light voice. Now, this battle is truly growing more and more interesting. The quasi-sword emperor and the quasi-martial god are actually having their destined battle in advance. I truly feel more and more anticipation towards the outcome of their battle. On the square before the imperial palace, the entire crowd had erupted into an uproar and seethed with excitement when they found out that Yang Yi possessed the enlightened sword heart. No wonder both Li Xianjun and Lin Shiran's terrifying techniques were mysteriously destroyed by him. So it turns out that Yang Yi has attained the enlightened sword art, the enlightened sword heart, the ability to destroy all techniques with a single strike. I never expected that Yang Yi is actually a quasi-sword emperor. No wonder that he was always so composed and arrogant. So he possessed the enlightened sword heart. The enlightened sword heart. Yuan Tong is in danger now. However, I still think that Yuan Tong will win. So what if he possesses the enlightened sword heart? Supposedly, Yuan Tong has comprehended the heart of the strong. What's the heart of the strong? That's an existence that grows stronger in accordance with the enemy. Moreover, Yuan Tong has obtained the guidance of the extraordinary experts of the origin school. Regardless of whether it was combat experience or any other aspect, Yang Yi can't compare to Yuan Tong at all. But don't forget that Yang Yi has comprehended 4th-level sword intent and possesses the enlightened sword heart that's capable of destroying all techniques with a single strike. You witnessed it earlier, it isn't an exaggeration at all. Moreover, Yang Ye's physical body is comparable to a king-rank dark beast. If Yuan Tong can't utilize any formidable combat techniques, then how would we break through Yang Ye's physical defenses? In my opinion, this battle is full of suspense. Yang Yi is truly scheming. He actually concealed his trump cards for so long before finally revealing them now. In my opinion, if he didn't have to go against Yuan Tong, then he would probably continue concealing those trump cards of his. This is really too scheming of him, and I look down upon him for that. You look down upon him? You idiot. That's called concealing his strength. Understand? That's enough. No matter what, this battle will definitely be this year's Ascension rankings. No, it'll definitely be the most exciting battle since the Ascension rankings began. The quasi-sword emperor against the quasi-martial god. Just thinking about it makes me feel excited. Let's wait and see if Yuan Tong defeats Yang Yi to secure his title as the martial god, or will Yang Yi defeat Yuan Tong to attain the position of sword emperor. At the moment that Yang Yi revealed the ability of his enlightened sword heart, countless transmission talismans had instantly erupted from the square outside the Imperial Palace. At the headquarters of the Talisman Masters Association, the president, Bai Shan, who was crafting a talisman, had suddenly received a transmission talisman. After he heard the content of it, a crack resounded as the talisman brush-in Bai Shan's hand was snapped into two. The fourth level of sword intent before the age of 20. The enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. In the hall, Bai Shan's murmurs that were filled with disbelief drifted through the hall, whereas he himself had vanished from the hall and had flashed towards the Imperial Palace. At one of the four great clans of the Imperial capital, the Yang clan. The Yang clan's patriarch was an Exalt realm expert called Yang Nung. He had white hair and a face that was covered in wrinkled. When he finished listening to the contents of the transmission talisman, Yang Nung had suddenly started roaring with laughter. Ha ha! The fourth level of sword intent before the age of 20. The enlightened sword heart before the age of 20. The quasi-sword emperor. Ha ha! The heavens truly don't wish for my Yang clan to be destroyed. At this instant, all the superior clans and powers in the entire imperial capital had found out about Yang Ye's attainment of the enlightened sword heart. The quasi-sword emperor and quasi-martial god were fighting for the first position on the Ascension rankings. At this moment, there was no news more exciting and delightful than this. So, at this moment, countless profounders in the capital were rushing madly towards the square outside the Imperial Palace. At this moment, Yuan Tong had finally taken Yang Yi serious for the first time. If the sword intent could only cause slight trouble for him, then the enlightened sword heart was capable of posing a threat to him. Because Yang Yi could destroy all techniques with a single strike. Unless he'd grasped a combat technique to perfection, otherwise all techniques were useless before Yang Yi. On the other hand, even he who possessed extraordinary natural talent was unable to grasp an earth rank or heaven rank technique to perfection. Because even king realm experts and spirit realm experts were rarely able to accomplish that. Since he was unable to attain perfection in his cultivation of a technique, it meant that there was only one way to defeat Yang Yi, and it was hand-to-hand combat battle. Yuan Tong was undoubtedly very formidable in hand-to-hand combat. If he was facing any other opponent, the hand-to-hand combat was definitely an enormous advantage of his. However, when he faced Yang Yi, who possessed a physical body comparable to a king-rank dark beast, this advantage of his wasn't very great anymore. In short, Yang Yi had forced him to start taking Yang Yi seriously and taking the battle seriously. Because he had a feeling that if he wasn't serious, then his title as the martial god would probably be gone. I never expected that you would possess the enlightened sword heart. What a surprise! As he gazed at Yang Yi, Yuan Tong spoke slowly. I originally thought that attaining the title of martial god would be extremely easy for me because not a single profounder in the younger generation of the Southern Territory could make me take them seriously. But I never imagined that you would appear. Never mind. Once I defeat you, my title as martial god would become even more secure, and that existence on Martial God Mountain would have no further excuses. Come, let me see if you, the quasi-sword emperor, are stronger or I, the quasi-martial god, am stronger. Yang Ye's wrists moved slightly, and then violet spirit and green darkness that had fallen to the ground in the surroundings instantly transformed into two rays of light that flew towards him. He held green darkness in his left hand and violet spirit in his right hand, and then he slowly raised them and pointed them at Yuan Tong before he said, "I'm not interested in the title of Sword Emperor, but it's fine. My objective is the first position on the Ascension rankings. So, in other words, we must decide on a victor. Since it's like that, then let's fight to our heart's content." Haha. That's exactly what I want. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuan Tong suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot, and then his figure shot out like a cannonball towards Yang Yi. When he saw Yuan Tong shoot explosively towards him, Yang Ye's figure moved as well, and he flashed towards Yuan Tong. Bang! As soon as they came into contact with each other, an explosion rumbled and resounded from the battlefield, and then both of them shot backward explosively. In the next moment, they shot towards each other again. At this moment, Yang Yi utilized the basic sword technique that he hadn't utilized for a very long time. Perhaps the basic sword technique was useless against others, but it couldn't be any better when utilized for close-quarter combat. With the enhancement of his sword intent and his perfect grasp of the basic sword technique, the might revealed by the sword sect's basic sword technique had instantly risen by countless times in Yang Ye's hands. Even Yuan Tong had to fear the might of every single strike of his sword and not dare go head-on against it. This caused the countless spectators to be extremely shocked because they'd never imagined that the basic sword technique could possess such might. Of course, Yuan Tong's combat instinct caused Yang Yi to be extremely fearful of it as well, because every single seemingly perfect strike of his sword would be easily avoided or blocked by Yuan Tong. Moreover, after Yuan Tong blocked his attacks, Yuan Tong's own attacks would be extremely shocking and difficult to deal with, especially when these attacks were enhanced by Yuan Tong's battle intent and fist intent. Even the slightest carelessness would cause him to suffer a barrage of attacks from Yuan Tong. This made Yang Yi feel as if he was treading on thin ice, and he didn't dare be careless at all. At this moment, Yuan Tong was extremely fearful of Yang Yi as well, and he didn't dare be careless in the slightest, because Yang Ye's method of fighting was truly too shameless. Yang Yi had basically given up on defending himself and completely seemed like he wanted to exchange his own life for Yuan Tong's life. The reason Yang Yi was able to do this so fearless was that his physical body was comparable to a king-rank dark beast, so suffering a few punches were utterly trivial to Yang Yi. However, if Yuan Tong were to suffer a few blows of Yang Ye's sword, then it would definitely be lethal. So, at this moment, Yuan Tong had really become serious. The spectators were astonished by the battle between Yang Yi and Yuan Tong, because regardless of whether it was Yuan Tong or Yang Yi, both of their combat instincts were too terrifying. This caused the spectators to have the misconception that it wasn't two First Heaven Realm experts who were fighting before them, and it was King Realm experts or even Spirit Realm experts instead. The battle between Yang Yi and Yuan Tong had arrived at its climax. At this moment, Yang Yi, who held Violet Spirit in his right hand, had executed the sword sect's basic sword technique to the acme of perfection. In the opinions of the others, it wasn't a yellow rank technique anymore, and it was an earth rank sword technique. Moreover, at this moment, Yang Yi fully displayed the might of the sword control technique. Yes, at the same time he was utilizing the basic sword technique against Yuan Tong. The green darkness sword had transformed into a green ray of light that ceaselessly attacked Yuan Tong. It could be said that Yuan Tong wasn't just fighting Yang Yi alone, and he was fighting two people, because the green darkness sword which Yang Yi controlled revealed a might that wasn't inferior to another First Heaven Realm expert. Even though the spectators didn't really like Yang Yi, they had no choice but to feel admiration towards Yang Ye's sword techniques, especially the sword control technique, because in their opinions the green darkness sword simply seemed as if it had come to life. Even though Yang Yi had gained the upper hand in the battle, his expression grew more and more solemn, because he noticed that Yuan Tong was still able to resist him with ease even when he was attacking in unison with the sword control technique. Yuan Tong's combat instinct was something that even he, Yang Yi, had to admire. At this moment, Yuan Tong's expression was extremely solemn as well. Even though he'd relied on his extraordinary combat instinct to repeatedly avoid Yang Ye's lethal strikes, he knew that he would definitely fall into an extremely disadvantageous position if this were to continue, because Yang Yi, who possessed the physical defense of a king-rank dark beast, could be said to be in an invincible position. Yuan Tong's eyes narrowed slightly when he thought up to hear. He suddenly slapped his right palm against the violet spirit sword that Yang Yi had slashed down towards him, and then he relied on the counterforce to retreat around 15 m back and withdraw from the battle. When he saw Yuan Tong stop, Yang Yi stopped as well, because he noticed the same problem that Yuan Tong had noticed, and that problem was that it was utterly impossible to finish Yuan Tong off by relying solely on close-quartered combat with the basic sword technique. The reason for this was that Yuan Tong's combat instinct was truly too terrifying. As he gazed at Yang Yi, Yuan Tong let out a light breath of air before he said, "I never expected that you would be able to pressure me to such an extent. Yang Yi, you can feel proud of yourself. But now, you don't have a chance to win anymore." As soon as he finished speaking, a strand of a terrifying, imposing aura suddenly swept out like a tornado from within Yuan Tong's body. The King Realm. The expression on Su Qingshi's beautiful face changed when she saw this scene, and she cried out involuntarily. Yu Heng, who stood by her side, was shocked as well, but he quickly shook his head and said, "It isn't the King Realm, and it's only the half-step King Realm. I never imagined that Yuan Tong has actually transformed a portion of the profound energy within his body into true essence and has attained the half-step King Realm. The half-step King Realm before the age of 20. Such natural talent can't be described with just the word terrifying. Only experts below the King Realm are able to participate in the Ascension rankings. He's already attained the half-step King Realm, so does it violate the rules?" said Su Qingshi in a low voice. Yu Heng shook his head and said, "It doesn't violate the rules. The half-step King Realm is still below the King Realm." Su Qingshi's face sank when she heard this. Even though the gaps between experts at the King Realm and First Heaven Realm couldn't be described as being like the gap between the heavens and the earth, there was no doubt that King Realm experts had numerous advantages when compared to First Heaven Realm experts. The greatest difference was that once one attained the King Realm, the profound energy within the body would undergo a qualitative transformation and become true essence. This true essence was naturally very much stronger than the profound energy possessed by First Heaven Realm profounders. If it was any other ordinary King Realm expert, then Yang Yi naturally had no reason to be too fearful of that expert. However, was Yuan Tong an ordinary King Realm expert? Even though he was merely at the half-step King Realm and only a portion of the profound energy within his body had been transformed into true essence, one couldn't forget that he was an extraordinarily monstrous genius. Surmounting realms to do battle was extremely normal for him, yet now he had the advantage of a higher realm of cultivation. So, was it possible for him to allow another to surmount the gap in their realms of cultivation to defeat him? The answer was that it was practically impossible. This was what Su Qingshi thought at this moment, and it was also the reason why her expression was gloomy. On the other side, Qing Yunzi was slightly stunned when he saw Yuan Tong erupt with the imposing aura of a half-step King Realm. Obviously, even he didn't know that Yuan Tong had attained the half-step King Realm. But in next to no time, the gloomy expression on his face had started to transform into a bright smile. Yuan Tong could be said to be on par with Yang Yi while he hadn't displayed his cultivation at the half-step King Realm. Now that Yuan Tong had utilized his cultivation at the half-step King Realm, it meant that Yuan Tong had a comparatively larger advantage. It truly is full of twists and turns. Li Si gazed at Yuan Tong and said, "I never expected that Yuan Tong actually concealed his cultivation, the half-step King Realm before the age of 20. How many years has it been since someone like this has appeared in the Southern Territory? Since the founding ancestor of the Origin School, there hasn't been another figure like him." Meanwhile, Bai Qi suddenly spoke from the side. Li Si shook his head lightly, and then he looked at Yang Yi and said, "I wonder if he has some other shocking trump card. If he doesn't, then the outcome is decided." At this moment, everyone was looking at Yang Yi because they wanted to see if Yang Yi had some sort of trump card. After all, Yang Yi had seemed to be always able to pleasantly surprise them throughout the competition. Did Yang Yi have any other trump card? He'd fully revealed the sword control technique, sword intent, and enlightened sword heart that he possessed. So, did he have any other trump card? The answer was of course he did. Since the beginning, even Yang Yi had overlooked one thing, and that thing was his true greatest trump card. Right at this moment, Yuan Tong's figure moved. Right at the instant this happened, Xianxia's pupils suddenly constricted, and then he didn't even give it any thought before he drew his sword and slashed. Bang! Yuantong had suddenly and strangely appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then his fist whistled through the air and left a string of explosions behind it as it smashed down towards Yang Ye's head. Fortunately, Yang Ye's reaction was sufficiently swift, and he'd slashed his sword towards Yuantong's fist. A muffled bang resounded before Yang Ye's expression changed, and then an enormous blast of force came from his sword and blasted him flying. Yuantong's ability to blast Yang Yi flying with a single push caused all the countless spectators in the surroundings to be shocked. This is the strength of a half-step King Realm expert. Yang Ye's legs moved slightly in midair, and his figure instantly stopped flying backward and descended to the ground. Yang Yi gazed at Yuantong while his eyes narrowed, and a wisp of a solemn expression flashed within them. In the past, he hadn't taken ordinary King Realm experts seriously. Now, Yuantong, who was merely a half-step King Realm expert, had actually been able to blast him flying with a single punch of the sword. Looks like I really was slightly proud and arrogant in the past. The King Realm was extremely formidable, but there were numerous King Realm experts who were very weak. He realized that he had to differentiate between the two. Yang Yi. Yuantong walked slowly towards Yang Yi, and he said while he walked, "Needless to say, you can feel proud of your accomplishments for being able to force out all of my trump cards. Of course, I'll feel proud of myself as well, because I, Yuantong, will be the first to attain the title of martial god after annihilating the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Now, I'll give you an opportunity. Execute your strongest attack. Otherwise, you won't have a chance." Yang Yi let out a light breath of air, and then he gestured with his right hand, and then the green darkness sword that circled around in the sky above his head had instantly flown into his grasp. As he gazed at the violet spirit sword and green darkness sword in his hand, Yang Yi took a deep breath before his fourth-level sword intent surged out and enveloped the two swords. Under the envelopment of his sword intent, the two swords instantly started vibrating intensely. When they witnessed this scene, both Yu Hong and Su Qingshi couldn't help but be excited because Yang Yi intended to awaken the sword spirit that was in deep sleep within the swords. If it was in the past, Yu Hong and Su Qingshi would definitely think that Yang Yi had gone mad. But now, it was entirely possible for Yang Yi, who possessed fourth-level sword intent, and the enlightened sword heart, to awaken this former Tao artifact. Yuantong stopped and gazed at Yang Yi, while a wisp of a puzzled expression flashed in his eyes. Even though he didn't know exactly what Yang Yi intended to do, his intuition told him that he was in danger. He had the intent to stop Yang Yi, but he'd dispelled the thought to act against Yang Yi when he thought about what he'd just said. He wasn't shameless enough to go back on something that he'd said in public. As Yang Ye's sword intent poured ceaselessly into the swords, they suddenly erupted with a strand of violet light and green light. After that, two resounding sword howls shot into the sky. Subsequently, under the astounded gazes of everyone in the surroundings, the two swords gradually rose into the sky before ceaselessly coiling around each other. In just a short moment, a strand of dazzling radiance suddenly erupted from the two swords, and then a slightly illusory and translucent little girl appeared in midair. The little girl was around 7 or 8 years of age. Her eyes were slightly closed, her face seemed as if it was like carved jade, and her hair was tied into 2 pigtails. Moreover, she wore a small linen dress that was covered in a floral print, and her jade-white feet were completely bare, causing her to seem like a little fairy that was extremely cute. Of course, the most striking feature she possessed was at the space between her brows. There was a small sword-shaped marking there, and it was like a sharp and swift sword that caused others to not dare stare directly at it. Yang Yi heaved a slight sigh of relief as he gazed at the little girl that appeared in midair. When he executed the sword control technique and summoned the green darkness sword from Su Qingshi earlier, he had a feeling that he could awaken the sword spirit that was slumbering with violet spirit and green darkness. Sure enough, he'd really succeeded. On the wall of the Imperial Palace, the excitement in the eyes of Su Qingshi and Yu Hong was impossible to conceal when they saw this illusory and translucent little girl. This Tao artifact of the Sword Sect is finally about to return after so many years of slumber. As he gazed at the little girl in midair, Li Si said in a low voice, "If I'm not wrong, then that is probably the sword spirit of the Azure Sword that's ranked at the 10th position on the Tao artifact rankings. According to rumor, it was heavily injured by the Ghost Sect's master all those years ago, and then it fell into a deep sleep. Moreover, the Azure Sword itself was split into two and vanished from the world. I never expected that it would be awakened by Xianxia now. Even if Xianxia is only able to bring forth 10% or 20% of its might, Yuantong would still be unable to resist the might he would be able to bring forth. Bai Qi suddenly said, "Would Yuantong allow Xianxia to completely awaken this sword spirit?" Li Si glanced at Yuantong, and then he shook his head lightly. Sure enough, right when Xianxia was about to continue awakening the sword spirit of the Azure Sword, Yuantong suddenly said, "Playing tricks and wasting time. I don't have the time to waste on you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yuantong suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he shot explosively towards Xianxia. Xianxia grunted coldly when he saw Yuantong shooting over explosively. With a command in his heart, the swords that were scattered all over the surroundings had instantly shot into the sky, and then they transformed into numerous rays of light that flew swiftly towards Yuantong. Yuantong's expression turned gloomy when he saw this. If Xianxia was allowed to awaken the spirit of that Tao artifact, then it would definitely be a calamity for him. Perhaps Xianxia would be unable to control the Tao artifact, but he didn't dare to take that risk, because the might of a Tao artifact was truly too terrifying. Moreover, this Tao artifact was a sword, so, even if he had to go back on his world, he couldn't allow Xianxia to awaken the spirit of that Tao artifact. But it was a slight pity. Under the obstruction of the dense mass of swords, he was utterly unable to approach Xianxia. Right when he intended to execute another heaven rank technique, the little girl that floated in midair had suddenly opened her eyes. At the moment that she opened her eyes, everyone in the surroundings instantly fell silent, and all of their gazes shot simultaneously towards this little girl that seemed extraordinarily cute. The little girl blinked, and then she swept the crowd with her gaze before it descended onto Xianxia in the end. She gazed at Xianxia for a short moment before she suddenly transformed into a strand of light that appeared in front of Xianxia. After that, she said, "It was you who awakened me?" The corners of Xianxia's mouth twitched as he gazed at this sword spirit that seemed like a human. Isn't it a little too like a person? Even though the sword spirit before him was merely a little girl, Xianxia didn't dare look down upon her at all and hurriedly nodded right away. When she saw Xianxia nod, the little girl nodded lightly as well, and then she said, "Fourth level sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and you've even awakened me. You're qualified to utilize Azure. You're not one with the Azure Sword?" Xianxia was astounded. The little girl rolled her eyes at Xianxia and said, "You idiot, you don't even know that? I'm the Azure Sword's sword spirit, so we're naturally one. Then since you said I can utilize the Azure Sword, in other words, I can utilize you as well." Xianxia had a slightly weird expression on his face. "Is there any problem with that?" The little girl's eyes opened wide as she gazed at Xianxia and asked this question. Xianxia laughed bitterly when he heard this, and he said, "How would I utilize you in your current form?" As he spoke, Xianxia pointed at Yuantong, who was encircled by the swords in the distance, and said, "He's very strong, and it's very difficult for me to defeat him without a Tao artifact." The little girl glanced at Yuantong, and her brows suddenly knit together upon laying eyes on Yuantong. After that, she gazed at Xianxia and said, "The quasi-martial god? The quasi-sword emperor?" Xianxia shrugged and said, "I don't know about all of that. All I know is that I have to defeat him if I want to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. Can you help me? Are there any benefits for me?" The little girl blinked as she spoke. The corners of Xianxia's mouth twitched. Is she really just a sword spirit and not a person? She actually knows how to ask for benefits. Exactly what sort of monster have I awakened? Can we deal with him first before we discuss that? Xianxia pointed at Yuantong and spoke in a slightly helpless tone. The little girl glanced at Yuantong, and then she looked at Xianxia and nodded. She said, "In the past, it's usually the sword emperor that loses to the martial god. I hope you won't be as useless as those sword emperors of the past." Oh, I almost forgot. With your current strength, you're probably not even able to swing my true body once. As soon as she finished speaking, she shrugged and revealed a helpless expression. Are you really that terrifying? I'm not even able to swing you once. Yang Yi was slightly doubtful. The little girl was clearly slightly displeased by Yang Ye's doubt. She glared at Yang Yi before her figure shook, and then she transformed into a sword that floated in front of Yang Yi. This sword was a few centimeters longer than violet spirit or green darkness. One side of the sword was dark green in color while the other was dark violet in color. Moreover, numerous strange markings were inscribed on both sides of it. If it was based on the make of this sword, then an ordinary person would definitely not think that this was the azure sword that was ranked at the 10th position on the Dao artifact rankings, because it was truly a bit too ordinary. As he gazed at the azure sword before him, Yang Yi took a deep breath before he stretched out his hand and suddenly grasped its hilt. Right when he did that, an enormous bang resounded from ahead. Yang Yi raised his eyes to look over, and he saw those swords he'd been controlling to attack Yuan Tong had been blasted into pieces while Yuan Tong was walking slowly towards him. The corners of Yuan Tong's eyes twitched when he saw the azure sword in Yang Ye's hand. Yang Yi actually succeeded in awakening the spirit of this Dao artifact, and it was actually willing to be utilized by Yang Yi. All of this caused him to feel slight disbelief, and it was difficult for him to accept this, because the sword spirit of every single Dao artifact was proud, and one needed formidable strength in order to control them. However, Yang Yi was merely at the first heaven realm. Right at this moment, Yang Yi held azure with both hands as he raised it up slowly, and then he pointed it at Yuan Tong. Right when Yang Yi had just circulated his profound energy, his expression instantly changed while disbelief appeared in his eyes, because he noticed that as soon as he circulated his profound energy, the profound energy within his dantian had been instantly sucked dry by the azure sword. Moreover, when the profound energy within his dantian entered azure, it was like a rock that entered an ocean. There was no reaction from azure at all. At this moment, Yang Yi finally understood what the little girl meant. With the size of his profound energy reserves right now, it was utterly impossible for him to utilize a Dao artifact. When he witnessed this scene, Yuan Tong was first stunned, and then he roared madly with laughter. He laughed for a moment before he gazed at Yang Yi with a mocking expression and said, "Yang Yi, you're truly ignorant. Do you think a Dao artifact is so easy to utilize? Not to mention that you're merely at the first heaven realm. If you don't have any special methods, then it would be impossible for you to utilize a Dao artifact even after you've advanced into the king realm." On the walls of the imperial palace, Qing Yunzi and Kaifeng, who had unsightly expressions just now, had started smiling. After taking such pains to awaken the spirit of that Dao artifact, he's unable to utilize it in the end. What a joke. On the other hand, Yu Hong and Su Qingshi's expression had turned grim. If he's unable to utilize the Dao artifact, then how would Yang Yi resist Yuan Tong, who's already at the half-step king realm? At this moment, Yu Hong even wanted to head down to the battlefield and ask Yang Yi to admit defeat. However, he knew that it was impossible because Yang Yi wouldn't listen to him at all. What a pity! Li Si shook his head and said, "His cultivation is too low. If he was at the half-step king realm like Yuan Tong and had transformed a portion of the profound energy in his body into true essence, then perhaps he would be able to utilize the azure sword. Unfortunately, his cultivation is truly too low." "It really is a pity," Bai Qi agreed. "Haha. He awakened its sword spirit yet is unable to utilize the Dao artifact. What a joke." Yang Yi is probably aggrieved to the point of wanting to admit defeat now, right? I think that should be the case. If I were him, I would definitely feel aggrieved to the extreme. Without the Dao artifact to help him, Yang Yi should be dead this time, right? It's just a slight pity that the future Sword Emperor is going to vanish from the world just like that. The Sword Emperor, how many thousand years has it been since one has appeared in the Southern Territory? I never expected that once someone likely to become the Sword Emperor appeared, he would directly encounter the quasi-martial god. Needless to say, Yang Yi is truly pitiable. At the moment that they noticed Yang Yi was unable to utilize the azure sword, The crowd below the arena started to take pleasure in Yang Ye's misfortune because they naturally sided with Yuan Tong in this battle. Otherwise, wouldn't they be slapping their own faces if they sided with Yang Yi? Yuan Tong gazed at Yang Yi while his eyes were filled with an expression of mocking and ridicule. He said, "Yang Yi, I bet you never imagined that you would be unable to utilize it after you awakened its sword spirit. You're probably extremely aggrieved and depressed now, right?" When he spoke up to hear, Yuan Tong suddenly sighed, and then he said, "Alas, what a pity. I originally wanted to witness the might of this Tao artifact. But regretfully, I won't be able to fulfill my wish. Is that so?" Yang Yi laughed coldly and mocked. "Wasn't it you, Yuan Tong, the future martial god, who was anxiously trying to stop me?" Yuan Tong's gaze turned icy cold when he heard this, and then he grunted coldly and said, "Stop trying to argue about it. Yang Yi, since you were able to force me, Yuan Tong, into such a state, you can feel proud even in death." Yang Yi shook his head, and then he said, "Since you want to witness the might of this Tao artifact, then I'll satisfy you." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi closed his eyes slightly and immersed his consciousness into his body. After that, he said, "I don't exactly what sort of existence you are, and I don't know what objectives you have. All I want to say is I'm at a moment of life and death. If you don't borrow your profound energy to me, then today will be the day of my death." What was Yang Ye's greatest trump card? It wasn't sword intent, nor was it the enlightened sword heart. It was the mysterious tiny vortex. It was exactly because of the tiny vortex that Yang Yi was able to undergo such tremendous changes in a short period of time. Moreover, there had been numerous moments of life and death where the tiny vortex had suddenly lent him a hand, allowing the situation to be turned around. Just as he said, he didn't know its origins or objectives. However, he knew that the tiny vortex was one with him, and it could be said that they were bound together for good and bad. Of course, it didn't mean that he would definitely die at Yuan Tong's hands if he didn't have the tiny vortex's help. Even if Yuan Tong was a half-step King Realm expert, it was still slightly impossible for Yuan Tong to kill him. If they continued fighting like this, then the most likely outcome was that both of them would suffer heavy injuries. Such an outcome was naturally not something Yang Yi wanted. In Yang Ye's opinion, he was determined to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. Since it was like that, then it was best for him to directly utilize his biggest trump card. After a moment of silence, there was no movement from the tiny vortex. Right when Yang Yi was about to give up, the golden profound energy within the pool of profound energy in the tiny vortex had suddenly started surging. Subsequently, the golden profound energy was like a surging yellow river that shot out violently, and it flowed through the meridians in Yang Ye's body and into the azure sword in his hand. As the golden profound energy from the tiny vortex surged endlessly into the azure sword, it gradually lit up, and all the spectators in the surroundings were stunned when they witnessed this scene. As he gazed at the azure sword that was suffused with an azure glow, Qing Yunzi, who stood on the wall of the imperial palace, muttered in dejection. How could this be possible? How could he be able to utilize that Tao artifact? It wasn't just Qing Yunzi who felt disbelief. All the other great figures in the vicinity felt disbelief as well. They were clearly aware of how terrifying a Tao artifact was, and that was exactly the reason why they felt even more unable to believe this. Because a Tao artifact was absolutely not something that the profound energy of a First Heaven Realm Profounder could activate. Even if it was a King Realm Profounder, unless that Profounder was an extraordinary genius, it was absolutely impossible to utilize a Tao artifact as well. However, Yang Yi had succeeded right before their eyes. As the golden profound energy in the pool of profound energy surged ceaselessly into it, the azure sword started to tremble violently. Moreover, a faint glow gradually appeared on it. Because the vibration from it grew stronger and stronger, Yang Yi had no choice but to hold it with both hands. However, even then, Yang Yi found it difficult to control the vibrations of the sword. How could this be possible? As he gazed at Yang Yi, who held the azure sword, Yuan Tong seemed as if he'd lost his soul, and his eyes were filled with disbelief as he muttered, "How could you possibly utilize a Tao artifact? It was a Tao artifact. Even he was unable to utilize one. Yet Yang Yi was able to do so. Did this represent that Yang Yi was a greater genius than him? When he thought up to here, Yuan Tong's expression turned savage and slightly frenzied. He gazed at Yang Yi with crimson-red eyes, and he said in a fierce voice, "I don't believe it. I don't believe you're an even more monstrous genius than I, Yuan Tong, am." As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and shot explosively towards Yang Yi. A wisp of a ruthless expression flashed in Yang Yi's eyes when he saw this. He held the azure sword in both hands as he slashed it downwards. In an instant, an enormous strand of golden sword chi that was around 12 m wide and over 40 m long had shot out explosively from the tip of azure. At the instant the strand of sword chi left the tip of his sword, Yang Yi felt a wave of emptiness in his entire body, and it was caused by the fact that the profound energy in his body had been completely exhausted. At the same time, a wave of dizziness instantly filled his mind, causing him to almost faint. Fortunately, he used his strong will to maintain his consciousness and stop himself from collapsing. Everywhere the strand of golden sword chi passed, space was like glass that had been struck by a hammer, and it instantly shook violently as if it was on the verge of shattering. Moreover, an enormous and bottomless gully had appeared on the ground. Yuan Tong's pupils had instantly constricted to the size of a needle when he laid eyes upon this strand of sword chi, because the terrifying energy contained within it caused his soul to tremble. However, he was utterly unable to evade it because it was truly too swift. Without the slightest bit of hesitation, Yuan Tong instantly made his profound energy surge out from his body and form a barrier. At the same time, he stretched open his palm and pushed it forward as he shouted, "Defend!" As soon as he spoke, a white energy shield instantly appeared in front of him, and as the profound energy in his body surged ceaselessly into it, the white energy shield grew more and more material before it actually seemed like a material object in the end. Under the astounded gazes of everyone, the golden strand of sword chi collided with Yuan Tong's white-colored energy shield. After a brief moment of silence, an enormous world-shaking bang resounded from the point of collision. The white energy shield instantly dispersed into nothingness, while the golden sword chi didn't slow down at all as it struck Yuan Tong's profound energy barrier. Bang! An enormous bang resounded. Under the astounded gazes of everyone, the profound energy barrier that Yuan Tong formed was instantly shattered into pieces, and then he was blasted flying by the golden sword chi. He flew for around 100 m before he finally fell heavily to the ground, and his fate was unknown. The countless spectators in the surroundings gaped when they witnessed this scene, and they were dumbstruck. The expert that was said to be the most monstrous genius in the Southern Territory for the last 1,000 years, the expert said to be most likely to become the martial god, the expert who was said to be the #1 expert below the king realm, had actually lost just like this at the hands of a disciple of the sword sect that wasn't even renowned before this. I never expected that he would really defeat Yuan Tong. Li Si gazed at Yuan Tong, who lay motionlessly there while he spoke with a voice that carried dense disbelief. He said in a light voice, "Not only has he comprehended sword intent before the age of 20, but he has also improved it to the 4th level. Besides that, he has even comprehended the enlightened sword heart. Now, he utilized a Tao artifact while possessing a cultivation at the 1st heaven realm. He really is an extremely monstrous genius. This time, the sword sect's Taoist Zue, the talisman master's formation, and I were mistaken. If he's given the time, then he'll definitely become another existence like the sword sect's founding ancestor." Meanwhile, Bai Qi spoke abruptly. Bai Qi had compared Yang Yi to the founding ancestor of the sword sect, and this was undoubtedly a very high evaluation. After all those years ago, the sword sect's founding ancestor had reigned supreme throughout the world with a single sword in hand. Even the martial god of that time had been firmly suppressed by the sword sect's founding ancestor. Since the sword sect's founding ancestor had vanished from the Southern Territory, an extraordinary expert that could reign supreme over all experts had never appeared in the Southern Territory. Yet now, Bai Qi had compared Yang Yi to the founding ancestor of the sword sect, and this was sufficient to display how highly Bai Qi thought of Yang Yi. Li Si didn't refute Bai Qi. Conversely, he nodded in agreement. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly started walking slowly towards Yuan Tong. However, Yang Yi walked very slowly, and his footsteps were disorderly. He was weak to the point even a weak gust of wind would be able to blow him to the ground. Utilizing the Dao artifact hadn't just completely exhausted all the profound energy within his dantian and the tiny vortex. It made him feel completely exhausted to the point he was able to arouse a shred of strength in his entire body. Could be said that even an ordinary profounder could easily kill him right now. Even though he really wanted to lie down and rest, Yang Yi hadn't forgotten about Yuan Tong. Since Yuan Tong was his enemy and was an extraordinarily monstrous genius as well, then it was best for Yuan Tong to be dead. Yang Yi didn't hope to see Yuan Tong appearing before him and causing trouble for him again in the future. When they saw Yang Yi stagger towards Yuan Tong, the spectators in the surroundings gasped. Yang Yi actually intends to kill Yuan Tong? He actually dares to kill Yuan Tong? After all, Yuan Tong is a genius disciple of the Origin School, and the Origin School is the #1 sect in the Southern Territory. Yang Yi actually dares to not give the Origin School any face? At this moment, countless people were shocked by Yang Ye's actions. Needless to say, Yang Yi was truly extremely brave to dare to kill Yuan Tong. Right when Yang Yi was merely 10 m away from Yuan Tong, Qing Yunzi suddenly appeared in front of Yuan Tong, and then he lightly waved his right hand before a light bang resounded. It was exactly this light bang that caused Yang Ye's expression to change violently. Yang Yi wasn't an idiot. He naturally knew that the Origin School wouldn't allow him to kill Yuan Tong. So, he'd utilized the last bit of strength he had to move the hidden sword with the sword control technique just now, and he hoped to finish off Yuan Tong with the strike. However, he hadn't succeeded in the end. Not only that, he'd never imagined that Qing Yunzi would actually dare to make a move against him during the Ascension rankings. Because at this very moment, the hidden sword was actually flashing towards him like a bolt of lightning at a speed that he was utterly unable to evade. Right at this moment, Li Si and Bai Qi suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi. Li Si merely stretched his right hand forward and lightly grabbed the invisible hidden sword, and then with a light swing of his right hand, it fell in front of Yang Yi. After he did all of this, Li Si gazed at Qing Yunzi and said, "Qing Yunzi, the rules of the Ascension rankings. Breaking the rules of the Ascension rankings is disrespect to my Grand Qin Empire. Those who disrespect my empire must die." Li Si hadn't finished speaking when Bai Qi had interrupted Li Si, and then he took a step forward. With a twist of his wrist, the bone broadsword appeared in his hand, and then he swiftly slashed it towards Qing Yunzi. In an instant, a strand of blade qi that was numerous times larger than Yang Ye's golden sword qi from before shot explosively towards Qing Yunzi. Qing Yunzi's expression changed slightly when he saw this. He was naturally not afraid of Bai Qi. However, he'd never imagined that the Empire's #1 god of slaughter would actually leave no room for discussion and directly attack him. Looks like the Grand Qin Empire is already very displeased with my Origin School. When he thought up to here, Qing Yunzi's gaze turned icy cold because while the Empire was displeased with the Origin School, wasn't it the same for the Origin School? Qing Yunzi's figure flashed while he carried Yuan Tong, and he mysteriously appeared over 30 m away to the right to avoid that strand of blade qi. At the same time, he stretched open his right palm and swiftly slapped it down at Bai Qi. Heaven split palm. A colossal energy palm that practically enveloped the entire sky suddenly appeared here, and it carried terrifying energy as it shot swiftly at Bai Qi. Yang Ye's pupils constricted when he saw this scene, as expected of an Exalt Realm expert. When it's executed by Qing Yunzi, the Heaven Split Palm is countless times stronger than when it was executed by Yuan Tong. When they saw Qing Yunzi and Bai Qi had actually entered into battle, the spectators in the surroundings had hurriedly moved backward as they were deeply afraid of being affected by the battle. On the other hand, the great figures from the other sects remained silent while none stood up to try and mediate, because they didn't want to act impetuously and offend these two colossi, so it was best for them to watch from the sidelines. Bai Qi's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the enormous energy palm, and then his eyes instantly turned crimson red. When he saw this, Li Si's expression changed slightly. Because once Bai Qi's eyes changed color, then it represented that Bai Qi was about to go berserk. Once that happened, then the consequences would be extremely terrifying. After all, he wasn't called the god of slaughter for nothing. Li Si waved his right hand and a strand of pure white energy instantly rained down onto Bai Qi. Bai Qi's eyes instantly cleared up when he came into contact with this white-colored energy. Meanwhile, Li Si held the ruler of righteousness in his hand as he swiftly swung it towards the enormous energy palm. In an instant, a strand of white energy instantly struck the enormous energy palm. Bang! The energy palm immediately dispersed into the air. Qing Yunzi's expression changed slightly when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, Li Si and Bai Qi suddenly appeared both in front and behind him, and both of them were gazing at him with icy cold gazes. Qing Yunzi's expression turned gloomy. He wasn't afraid of any one of them, but if it was both of them at once, then he would be in danger. Right at this moment, a middle-aged man in a white robe suddenly and mysteriously appeared by Qing Yunzi's side. Bai Qi and Li Si's expressions changed violently when they saw this middle-aged man, whereas Qing Yunzi heaved a sigh of relief. After that, Qing Yunzi bowed slightly to the middle-aged man and said, "Sect Master." When they heard Qing Yunzi, the countless spectators in the surroundings were shocked. This middle-aged man before us is actually the sect master of the origin school, Yuan Tian. Yuan Tian glanced at Qing Yunzi before he directly disregarded both Li Si and Bai Qi, and then his gaze descended onto Yang Yi as he said, "Fourth level of sword intent, the enlightened sword heart, and a physical body that isn't inferior to a first heaven realm body refiner of the ancient times. You're really not bad. Are you willing to join my origin school?" When they heard Yuan Tian, the expressions of Kaifeng, Su Qingshi, Yu Heng, Li Si, and Bai Qi had instantly changed. All of them had never imagined that Yuan Tian would actually try to rope Yang Yi in. After all, the origin school's Qing Yunzi intended to kill Yang Yi just a moment ago. Qing Yunzi had never imagined that Yuan Tian would actually try to recruit Yang Yi, and his expression immediately turned slightly unsightly, because Yuan Tian's actions were slightly insulting to him. Even though he was displeased in his heart, he wasn't stupid enough to reveal it. Yang Yi was stunned as well. He'd never expected that this expert who was on the same level as Taoist Zue would actually ask him if he was willing to join the origin school. After a moment of deep contemplation, Yang Yi raised his head to look at Yuan Tian as he said, "If I join the origin school, then can the origin school save my mother?" So long as his mother could be saved, then not to mention joining the origin school, Yang Yi would even have any objections if he was asked to join the ghost sect. Yuan Tian frowned slightly. Right at this moment, roaring laughter suddenly resounded, and then Taoist Zue appeared mysteriously in front of Yuan Tian. He glanced at Yang Yi before he looked at Yuan Tian and said, "Yuan Tian, Yang Yi is a disciple of my sword sect. As the sect master of the origin school, isn't it a little low for you to try and recruit a disciple of the sword sect in public?" "Haha. According to my knowledge, Yang Yi seems to have been expelled from your sect, right?" Right at this moment, Bai Shan from the Talisman Masters Association suddenly appeared in the sky. Bai Shan nodded lightly to Yang Yi, who resided on the ground below, and then he said, "What? Old geezer Zue, you intend to recruit Yang Yi back into the sword sect now that you've seen that he possesses potential?" Right at this moment, a beautiful woman that wore a dress embroidered with flower patterns had suddenly appeared in the sky. When she appeared in the sky above, Taoist Zue and Yuan Tian's gazes instantly descended onto her. As they gazed at her, a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in both of their eyes. The beautiful woman paid no attention to Yuan Tian and Taoist Zue. She gazed at Yang Yi and a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in her eyes. She said, "You're really not bad. Feng, you gave birth to a good son." When he heard this, Yang Yi knew that it was very likely that this beautiful woman was the master of the Flower Palace. He immediately said, "Senior, according to the rules of the Ascension rankings, the person that obtains the first position will obtain the Ascension token, and the Ascension token allows its bearer to make a request from all the six great powers and the Grand Qin Empire, right? The beautiful woman spoke indifferently. You want my flower palace to let your mother go? Yang Yi hurriedly nodded. No. The beautiful woman's voice carried a firm and indisputable tone. Yang Ye's expression sank when he heard this, and then he asked, even if I hand over the Ascension token in exchange? The beautiful woman said, violation of the palace's rules is intolerable. Your mother violated the rules of the palace and betrayed it. If I forgive such a serious crime, then the disciples of my flower palace will think that they can get lucky too. If everyone learns from your mother's example, then how would my flower palace maintain its foothold in the southern territory? Yang Yi remained silent for a short moment before he said, then I'll utilize the Ascension token to request that the flower palace reduces my mother's punishment. Is that all right? Even though he'd expected that the flower palace would refuse, a strand of vicious emotions had swiftly swept through his heart when he heard the woman refuse. However, he'd suppressed it because he couldn't shed all pretenses and go against the flower palace right now. The beautiful woman stared at Yang Yi before she said, I know what your objective is, but I should tell you that your intentions to shake my flower palace is undoubtedly wishful thinking. Even though your natural talent is extremely monstrous, the resources and reserves of my flower palace isn't something that you can imagine. Of course, you'll definitely be a threat to my flower palace once you've grown. For the sake of preventing my flower palace from facing another problem, I've decided to eliminate you right now. As soon as she finished speaking, she looked at Taoist Zue and Yuan Tian before she said, both of you should be aware of my flower palace's rules. Since the founding ancestor set such rules, then everyone within the flower palace, I included, are unable to violate it. The palace rules are the foundation that my flower palace stands on. So, no matter which one of you takes him in, my flower palace will take your sect to be a mortal enemy. Moreover, I'll personally make a move to kill this kid. Even she couldn't avoid fearing Yang Ye's natural talent. If Yang Yi was allowed to grow, then the flower palace would definitely face great danger. So, her attitude towards Yuan Tian and Taoist Zue seemed extremely firm. Because she had to eliminate Yang Yi before he could grow. Both of them fell silent when they heard the beautiful woman. Yang Ye's natural talent really was very terrifying, and if Yang Yi was given the time, then he would absolutely become an extraordinary expert. However, that was only a matter of the future. Yet now, if they took Yang Yi in, then it represented their sects becoming mortal enemies with the Flower Palace. It was akin to going against an extraordinary power right now for the sake of possessing an extraordinary expert in the future. Yuan Tian glanced at Yang Yi while a wisp of pity flashed in his eyes. After that, he waved his right hand, and he vanished on the spot with Qin Yunzi and Yuan Tong. At the same time, a shrill cry suddenly resounded. Everyone in the surroundings was astounded. When they looked over, they saw a bloody arm had suddenly appeared where Yuan Tian stood just now. Violating the rules of the Ascension rankings is intolerable. My origin school's Qin Yunzi broke the rules, so I sever an arm of his. Moreover, he won't make another appearance in the Southern Territory for the next 50 years. Right when everyone felt puzzled, Yuan Tian's voice suddenly resounded, and they immediately came to an understanding. They said to themselves, the rules of the Ascension rankings really are strict and terrifying. Even an Exalt Realm elder of the Origin School who broke the rules suffered such severe punishment. In the future, those that didn't possess a certain level of backing would definitely not dare to violate the rules of the Ascension rankings. Yuan Tian had given up on Yang Yi, and only Taoist Zue and Bai Shan remained here. The beautiful woman looked at Taoist Zue and said indifferently, you ought to be clearly aware of the Sword Sect's current situation. If my Flower Palace becomes a mortal enemy of your Sword Sect, then I think the Sword Sect will fall from the ranks of the 6 great powers even with your presence in the Sword Sect. Moreover, if I'm not wrong, you probably have to try and overcome the Heaven Path soon. Taoist Zue's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He fell silent for a moment before he sighed in the end. Yang Ye's natural talent really shocked him, and if the Sword Sect had Yang Yi, then it would definitely be able to regain its former glory in the future. However, if he really took Yang Yi in and had to try to overcome the heaven path, then not to mention regaining its former glory, just surviving would be a problem for the sword sect. After he glanced at Yang Yi with slight regret, his figure flashed and vanished mysteriously on the spot. Once Taoist Zue left, only Bai Shan from the Talisman Masters Association remained here. The beautiful woman's gaze descended onto Bai Shan before she said, "President Bai, my flower palace has never had the intention to become enemies with the Talisman Masters Association. If Yang Yi was still a member of the Talisman Masters Association, then I would give President Bai some face and allow him to leave. However, if I'm not wrong, then Yang Yi isn't a member of the Talisman Masters Association anymore, right?" Bai Shan was speechless. He hadn't expected that this woman before him would actually know this piece of information as well. At the same time, he felt slightly regretful in his heart. He regretted abandoning Yang Yi on that day and allowing this woman to have an excuse now. The Talisman Masters Association wasn't afraid of the Flower Palace, but if he were to insist on protecting Yang Yi now, then it would undoubtedly be a slap to the Flower Palace's face. He had no doubt that the Talisman Masters Association would definitely suffer the frenzied revenge of the Flower Palace. The consequences of forming irreconcilable enmity with a colossus like the Flower Palace and fighting it to the death wasn't something that he could endure. Bai Shan sighed lightly, and then he didn't say another word. His figure flashed and vanished on the spot. A genius's true value only displayed itself in the future. In the end, Yang Yi was only a first heaven realm profounder right now. Even if he was an extraordinarily monstrous genius, the future was full of possibilities. Yang Yi might become an extraordinary figure like the founding ancestor of the, or he could die prematurely. In short, if he invested in Yang Yi, then he would only gain returns in the future. If the Flower Palace didn't exist in this equation, then the Origin School, Sword Sect, and the Talisman Masters Association would be extremely willing to place such an investment. However, since the Flower Palace existed in this equation, the price they had to pay for this investment was something that they couldn't bear at all, nor did they want to bear it. Yang Yi watched coldly as all of this happened, and he didn't say anything, because it was pointless for him to say anything before these extraordinary experts. In the past, he felt that so long as he revealed his potential, then someone wouldn't hesitate to offend the Flower Palace and invest in him. At this moment, he finally realized that the way he thought was mistaken. Now, he understood that potential really wasn't that important to these extraordinary experts, because they who had experienced countless years of time had witnessed the growth and premature deaths of too many extraordinary geniuses. Yang Yi had potential, and his potential was extremely huge. However, all of that was a matter of the future. Even Taoist Zue and Yuan Tian didn't dare guarantee how long Yang Yi could live for if the Flower Sect's master pursued Yang Yi. After Bai Shan left, the beautiful woman's gaze descended onto Yang Yi, and she said, "Will you take your own life, or should I?" Helplessness, extraordinary helplessness. This was what Yang Yi felt at this moment. When he faced this beautiful woman, he knew that he didn't have any chance. Not even the chance to flee, because the gap between him and the beautiful woman was truly too huge. Yang Yi took a deep breath, looked directly at her and said, "I know I have no chance to survive, but I still want to say that if I, Yang Yi, survive, then I'll definitely annihilate your Flower Palace in my lifetime. I'll end the lives of all the disciples of your Flower Palace, and I'll make the Flower Palace cease to exist in the Southern Territory." The beautiful woman laughed coldly and said, "You won't have the chance." As soon as she finished speaking, she waved her hand casually, and a fine flower petal shot violently towards Yang Yi at a speed he was unable to evade. The petal was very small, but the force contained within it was extremely terrifying. Everywhere it passed, a fine and pitch-black rift was instantly torn open in space. Yang Yi wanted to resist, but the might and speed of that petal wasn't something he could resist at all. With his current strength, all he could do before this tiny petal was wait for death to arrive. Even though there was boundless rage and unwillingness in his heart, but he couldn't do anything about it. In this world where the strong were respected, there were numerous times when experts didn't have to abide by the rules. Just like this very moment, This beautiful woman from the Flower Palace was able to disregard the rules of the Ascension rankings and make a move against him before the competition had even come to an end. The strong could do as they pleased while the weak could only resign themselves to being bullied. Clang! Suddenly, a strand of sword chi tore through the air and shot at the petal. It was none other than Xianxia who'd remained silent until now. Even though she knew that she was no match for the beautiful woman, she still couldn't just stand there and watch Yang die before her. So, she'd acted. When she saw Xianxia attack, the beautiful woman spoke in a cold and indifferent tone. "You overestimate your ability." The strand of sword chi that Xianxia executed had been blasted into dispersal as soon as it came into contact with the petal, and the petal shot towards Yang Yi at an even swifter speed. Xianxia was astounded. Right when it was merely a centimeter away from the center of Yang Ye's forehead, it suddenly and shockingly stopped there, and the beautiful woman's expression changed slightly when she witnessed this scene. Right at this moment, a middle-aged man who wore a yellow robe embroidered with 9 golden dragons appeared by Yang Ye's side. Moreover, Xianxia had arrived by this middle-aged man's side as well. The middle-aged man glanced at Yang Yi, who still remained calm and composed without revealing even a trace of fear, and then he nodded lightly while a wisp of admiration flashed in his eyes. He said, "The best way to test a person's attainments and natural talent in the Sword Dao is through that person's reaction at the instant before death. You were able to remain calm before danger and fearless of death while facing an expert that's countless times stronger than you, as expected of one who has attained the enlightened sword heart." Even though Yang Yi didn't know who this person was, Yang Yi owed this person his life. So, just out of consideration for this, Yang Yi couldn't be disrespectful to this person. He immediately bowed slightly to the middle-aged man, said, "Death. It's naturally something that I'm afraid of because I still have countless things that I want to do. But what can fear do? Instead of showing fear and incurring the disdain and ridicule of others, isn't it better to face it calmly? Even if it's death, one should die bravely." The middle-aged man grinned and said, "Your disposition isn't bad, your natural talent isn't bad, and you possess a loyal character, as expected of someone that Xia has taken a liking to. Her actions of breaking the rules of the palace to ask me to save you weren't taken in vain." Yang Yi was stunned when he heard this, and then he looked at Xianxia while warmth filled his heart. He hadn't imagined that it was actually Xianxia who asked this expert to save him. So, Yang Yi instantly felt ashamed in his heart when he thought about how he doubted Xianxia before this. Xianxia walked over to Yang Ye's side, and then she said, "This is my imperial grandfather." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. This middle-aged man is the founding emperor? Didn't the rumors say that the founding emperor has locked himself behind closed doors to cultivate? Why has he come out here? When he thought about what the founding emperor said about Xianxia breaking the rules of the palace, Yang Ye's heart sank. Even though Xianxia was a princess, it was probably extremely difficult for her to meet the founding emperor, and he didn't know what sort of price Xianxia had paid to actually be able to ask this extraordinary expert to abandon his cultivation. Founding emperor, what's the meaning of this? Right when Yang Yi was in deep thought, the beautiful woman spoke in a cold voice. "What's the meaning of this?" The founding emperor chuckled and said, "You Linglong, first you disregarded the rules of the ascension rankings that were set by my Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers, and then you attacked to kill within the imperial capital of my Grand Qin Empire. I want to ask you the same question as well." Yu Linglong's beautiful brows knit together, and then she said in a low voice, "Founding Emperor, you intend to protect Yang Yi?" He grinned, and then he pointed at Xianxia and Yang Yi before he said, "He's my granddaughter's husband. In other words, he can be considered to be a member of my Grand Qin Empire. Yu Linglong, do you think I would allow you to kill him in the imperial capital? Founding Emperor, you intend to go against my flower palace?" Yu Linglong's voice turned cold. "If you insist on thinking in that way, then it's not out of the question," said the founding emperor. Yu Linglong's face sank when she heard this. The Grand Qin Empire had the intention to act against the sects since a long time ago. Unfortunately, it had constantly lacked an excuse. If the Flower Palace were to make the first move against the Grand Qin Empire, then it would undoubtedly be giving the empire an excuse. At that time, the empire could act against the Flower Palace in a perfectly justified manner. She didn't know exactly how strong the Grand Qin Empire was, but it was definitely much stronger than her Flower Palace. So, it wasn't worth it to fight such a colossus to the death just for Yang Yi. Moreover, she would have plenty of opportunities to kill Yang Yi in the future, so why be impatient now? When she thought up to here, Yu Linglong glanced coldly at Yang Yi before she said, "Founding Emperor, I hope you'll always be there to protect him. He'll be representing my empire at the ancient battlefield." Right at this moment, the founding emperor had spoken abruptly. Yu Linglong's expression changed slightly, and then she glanced deeply at the founding emperor. The founding emperor suddenly said, "Palace Master Yu, let's make a deal, all right?" "What deal?" Yu Linglong frowned slightly. The founding emperor pointed at Yang Yi and said, "He can be considered to be half a member of the Qin household now, and his mother can be considered to be a relative of my imperial household. Of course, I'm aware of the rules of your palace, so I won't ask you to let his mother go. I only ask that you're able to allow his mother to live for 5 more years. Moreover, the Flower Palace is prohibited from dispatching experts at the Exalt realm and above against Yang Yi. For the sake of this, my Grand Qin Empire will give the human resources of a state to the Flower Palace. What do you think, Palace Master Yu?" Yu Linglong's eyelids twitched. The human resources of a state. To think that he's willing to make such a sacrifice. After a moment of silence, Yu Linglong said, "Deal. His mother will live for 5 years. I hope you don't go back on your word." Yu Linglong wasn't an idiot. She would naturally not refuse to obtain the human resources of an entire state in exchange for allowing a disciple and a first heaven realm profounder to live for 5 more years. "Of course I won't." The founding ancestor grinned as he spoke. Yu Linglong didn't stay here any longer. Her figure flashed, and she brought all the members of the Flower Palace along with her as she vanished from the square. When he saw Yu Linglong leave, the founding ancestor looked at Li Si and said, "You can announce that the Ascension rankings has come to an end." Li Si bowed slightly to the founding emperor, and then he looked at the crowd and said loudly, "The winner of the Ascension rankings, the Grand Qin Empire's Yang Yi." There were no claps or cheers from below, and there was only silence, because they'd never imagined that Yang Yi would be able to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings. However, it was a fact that he had, and he'd crushed the number 1 monstrous genius of the Southern Territory, Yuan Tong, in order to obtain the first position. Under the arrangements of the Grand Qin Empire, Yang Ye's name was like a plague that swept through the entire Southern Territory. At the same time, Yang Yi obtained a nickname, the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Why was he called the Quasi-Sword Emperor? Because Yang Yi hadn't gone to Sword Emperor Mountain to obtain the acknowledgement of the mysterious ancient sheath there. The first on the Ascension rankings and the Quasi-Sword Emperor. Yang Yi didn't care about all of this. He was just slightly at a loss. He was truly slightly at a loss when it came to the colossus that was the Flower Palace. Even if he was given 100 years of time, he would probably be unable to resist the Flower Palace by relying on his own strength. But the problem was that his mother only had 5 years of time. So, how should he save her? Under the orders of the founding emperor, all the profounders on the square had been sent away by the troops of the empire. At this moment, only Yang Yi, the founding emperor, and Xianxia remained here. The founding emperor suddenly said, "It isn't impossible for you to save your mother." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this, and then he raised his head to look at the founding emperor while his voice carried anxiousness. He said, "Please provide me with your guidance, senior." "Annihilate the Flower Palace," said the founding emperor in a flat voice. Yang Yi laughed bitterly when he heard this and said, "I want to do that as well. But senior, do you think I can annihilate the Flower Palace?" If he was able to annihilate it, then he would have done it a long time ago. Unfortunately, he couldn't. If you intend to accomplish it with your own strength, then you probably need the strength that the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect possessed all those years ago. Otherwise, even if you attain my level of cultivation, you would still be unable to annihilate the Flower Palace. The founding emperor said, "The resources, reserves, and strength of the Flower Palace exceeds your imagination. Then, The founding emperor shook his head and said, "You can't, but my Grand Qin Empire has the required strength. What price must I pay?" Yang Yi wasn't stupid. He knew that it was absolutely impossible for the founding ancestor to save him merely because of Xianxia, and he wasn't aware of the exact reason. Represent the empire at the ancient battlefield. The founding ancestor's expression was slightly solemn. The ancient battlefield? Yang Yi was puzzled because he'd never heard of such a place. The founding emperor suddenly said, "My empire and the 6 great powers have always been in harmony only in appearance, yet we've remained without conflict for so long. Do you know why?" "It's because of the Dark Beast Empire?" asked Yang Yi. "Then do you know why the Dark Beast Empire and we humans have been living peacefully until now even though we're both hostile against each other?" asked the founding emperor. Yang Yi shook his head. "Because we humans and the Dark Beasts have an even stronger enemy." The founding emperor looked towards the north and said, "There's a mountain range at the northernmost area of the Dark Beast Empire, and it's called Heaven Tower Mountain Range. This mountain range is extremely and over 1,000,000 kilometers wide. There's an extremely formidable race of beings living on the other side of this mountain range. They possess an innate advantage that both humans and dark beasts don't. Not only are they able to cultivate combat techniques, but their physical bodies are also stronger than dark beasts. They are the devil race." "The devil race?" Yang Yi was puzzled. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, "They're blessed by the heavens. Every single young man of the devil race that has come of age wouldn't have to intentionally temper the body, yet their physical strength and defense would be even stronger than ordinary king-rank dark beasts. Besides that, they are able to cultivate the various combat techniques that only we humans are able to cultivate. The geniuses of our human race can't be called geniuses in front of them at all. For example, if Yuan Tong was placed amongst the younger generation of the devil race, then he can be considered as outstanding at most." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard the founding emperor's last sentence. Even though Yuan Tong had lost to him, Yuan Tong's strength was extremely formidable. If he hadn't awakened the sword spirit of the Azure Sword and utilized the tiny vortex, then the outcome of the battle between him and Yuan Tong would probably be uncertain. But it was exactly such an extraordinary expert that could only be considered as outstanding amongst the devil race. Yang Yi said, "Senior, since the devil race is so formidable, then why have I never heard of it nor seen any of their members in the Southern Territory?" "That's naturally because my Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers work together to conceal it," the founding emperor said. "The devil race is an enormous threat to both our human race and the dark beasts. If it wasn't for the Heaven Tower mountain range acting as a barrier, the current owners of the Southern Territory would probably not be our human race and the dark beasts. It would be the devil race instead. Since there's the Heaven Tower mountain range there, then what's the ancient battlefield?" Yang Yi was puzzled. Every single year, countless youths from the devil race would climb over Heaven Tower mountain range on foot. Most of these youths would perish while climbing over the mountain range. However, so long as they succeeded, then their strength and natural talent would absolutely be horrifying. To put it simply, if you and Yuan Tong were asked to climb over that mountain range, then with the natural talent and strength both of you possess, both of you would only have a 30% chance at most," said the founding emperor. Yang Yi was shocked. With the founding emperor's identity and strength, since he'd said they had a 30% chance, then they probably really had a mere 30% chance. While both he and Yuan Tong only had a 30% chance of success, those youths of the devil race were able to climb over the mountain range instead. Moreover, it was more than one. So, such natural talent and strength. Yang Yi took a deep breath, suppressed the shock in his heart, and then he asked, "Why have they come to our human world?" "To temper themselves," the founding ancestor said in a low voice. "The devil race is a race that respects the strong. Climbing over Heaven Tower mountain range is a form of tempering, and the battles between them and the geniuses of the younger generation of our human race is a form of tempering as well. The objective behind their actions is naturally to allow themselves to become stronger. Of course, besides becoming stronger, exhausting the number of geniuses in the younger generation of our human race is probably another one of the devil exalt's objectives. The devil exalt. Yang Yi was shocked again when he heard this name, because he'd heard of the devil exalt from Xianxia. However, he hadn't imagined that the #1 expert in the Southern Territory would actually not be a human profounder but a member of the devil race. Do you know why we held the ascension rankings? Asked the founding emperor. Yang Yi shook his head. Because we wanted to choose strong profounders to head to the ancient battlefield. It isn't just these independent cultivators of the Southern Territory that will be heading to the ancient battlefield. Even the disciples of the various great powers and the elites of the Dark Beast Empire will be going as well. All of you have a single mission, and it's to do your best to annihilate those young geniuses of the devil race, said the founding emperor in a low voice. Yang Yi remained silent for a short while before he said, "Since Senior paid such a huge price to save me and allow my mother to live for 5 more years, it's naturally impossible for your objective behind it to be so simple as merely representing the Grand Qin Empire to fight the youths of the devil race, right?" The founding emperor chuckled and said, "It isn't so complicated. Besides, out of consideration for the fact that you're the one this little girl has taken a liking to, it's also because my empire will fight the Flower Palace sooner or later. Of course, if you didn't possess natural talent that I thought highly of, then I would naturally not pay such a huge price. Since you have natural talent and potential while my empire would be fighting the Flower Palace sooner or later, then why shouldn't I rescue you and make the Flower Palace have another terrifying genius who possesses great potential as its enemy? But heading to the ancient battlefield doesn't seem to benefit the empire at all, right?" asked Yang Yi. "Of course it does," the founding emperor said. "Even though there's only a slim chance of survival, heading to the ancient battlefield is an opportunity for the members of my imperial household to grow stronger. If the members of my imperial household die at the hands of the youths from the devil race because their strengths were inferior, then they deserve death. However, you ought to be aware of the relationship between my empire and the 6 great powers. I'm worried that the members of my imperial household would perish at the hands of the disciples from the 6 great powers instead. You want me to protect the disciples of the imperial household?" Yang Yi frowned as he spoke. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, "Because we have an agreement with the devil exalt, and experts at the spirit realm and above can't make an appearance at the ancient battlefield. So, my empire is utterly unable to dispatch experts to protect the members of the imperial household from the shadows. On the other hand, once they make an appearance at the ancient battlefield, then the 6 great powers would definitely join forces against them. So, I need your help. Besides that, it's extremely beneficial for you to head to the ancient battlefield as well. After all, it's an ancient ruin, and even though it's filled with all sorts of dangers, that place is filled with all sorts of fortuitous encounters as well. Moreover, there are countless experts to be your sparring partners there. Isn't that exactly what you need right now?" Yang Yi shook his head slowly and said, "Senior, I want to become strong for the sake of rescuing my mother. If I can't rescue my mother, then would there be any point in it even if I, Yang Yi, become the #1 expert in the Southern Territory?" The founding emperor grinned and said, "I understand your worries. Don't worry, since Yu Linglong has made a deal with me, then she will naturally not go back on her word. Your mother will definitely be fine for the next 5 years of time. As for 5 years from now..." When he spoke up to here, the founding emperor paused for a moment and said, "If you want to save your mother, then you must ceaselessly strengthen yourself during these 5 years of time. The matters of the world are ever-changing. If you don't become stronger, then perhaps you might vanish from the world tomorrow. Then, who would rescue your mother?" Yang Yi fell silent when he heard this. "Right, in short, it's because my strength is too weak. I received the founding emperor's help today and was able to survive the Flower Palace's master. But what about the next time? Who would help me then? Become stronger. Become stronger." At this moment, Yang Yi urgently desired to become stronger. Because only by becoming stronger would he be able to survive. Only by surviving would he have the opportunity to rescue his mother. "Senior, when will I be heading to the ancient battlefield?" asked Yang Yi. When he saw Yang Yi stop being obsessed about rescuing his mother, the founding emperor grinned and said, "The ancient battlefield will be opened a month from now. At that time, my Grand Qin Empire will notify all the profounders that possess sufficient strength, the disciples of the countless clans in the empire, and some of the elite troops of my empire that they should gather here. After that, they'll be teleported to the ancient battlefield via the teleportation formation here. Senior intends to dispatch the army there? Yang Yi was astounded. The founding emperor nodded lightly and said, even though it's extremely dangerous to them, it's an enormous opportunity as well. It's an opportunity to become stronger. Of course, the elite forces will head to the ancient battlefield as independent cultivators. Otherwise, they would probably die at the hands of humans before they can even fight the youths of the devil race. Yang Yi shook his head. The human race still intends to kill each other while facing the threat of such a terrifying existence. The human race is really courting death. However, it wasn't related to him at all. Try your best not to leave the imperial capital during this month. It isn't just the Flower Palace that intends to kill you now. Even the Origin School and Ghost Sect probably intend to eliminate you as well, said the founding emperor. Yang Yi nodded. Heading to the ancient battlefield is a new beginning for you, because there are no experts at the spirit realm and above there. So, you can swiftly improve your strength there, and only there would you be able to freely improve your strength without worrying about the other powers dispatching extraordinary experts to kill you. So, make good use of this opportunity. After he finished saying all of this, the founding emperor's figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After the founding emperor left, Yang Yi turned around to look at Xianxia, who'd been silent until now, and he said, "Thank you." Xianxia shook her head and smiled before she said, "You don't have to thank me. If you didn't comprehend 4th level sword intent, if you didn't possess the enlightened sword heart, and if you didn't defeat Yuan Tong, then my imperial grandfather wouldn't have saved you. You ought to be very clearly aware of that." Right when Yang Yi was about to say something, Li Si suddenly appeared in front of Yang Yi, and then he nodded slightly to Xianxia before he gazed at Yang Yi. With a flip of his palm, a spatial ring had appeared in his palm, and he said, "This is the reward for the first on the Ascension rankings. Besides that, young brother Yang's name has probably spread throughout the Southern Territory by now. So, if it's possible, then try your best not to use your true name in front of outsiders. After all, there are numerous people that want to kill you." Yang Yi nodded, and then he received the spatial ring and said, "Thank you for the reminder, Senior." Li Si grinned and said, "Don't mention it. Since you're Princess Xia's husband, then you're a member of my Grand Qin Empire, even though you can't hold a position in the imperial court." When he spoke up to hear, 2 command tokens appeared in Li Si's palm, and he said, "One of these 2 command tokens is the Ascension token, the reward from the Ascension rankings. The other is a token from the founding emperor. You can travel freely through the empire with this token in your possession. Moreover, you can mobilize the guards of all the cities except the imperial capital." Yang Yi was shocked when he heard this. Mobilize the guards from all the cities? Why would the founding emperor give me such huge authority? After pondering deeply for a moment, Yang Yi didn't refuse it and accept the 2 command tokens. He gazed at the Ascension and pondered deeply for a brief moment before he grunted coldly. He'd taken great pains to obtain the first position on the Ascension rankings, all for the sake of this Ascension token. However, when he finally obtained it now, it was like a piece of scrap metal. Li Si nodded lightly when he saw Yang Yi accept the command tokens, and then his figure flashed and vanished on the spot. After Li Si left, Yang Yi passed the command tokens to Xianxia and said, "These 2 command tokens are no different than scrap metal in my possession, and they ought to be of use in yours." Xianxia glanced at the 2 command tokens before she said, "You really intend to give them to me? Do you know their uses? Especially that token from my imperial grandfather. With that in your possession, the authority you possess wouldn't be inferior to a general with actual authority." Yang Yi shook his head and said, "What a joke! Should I take the Ascension token and request something from the Origin School or the Ghost Sect? Or perhaps the Flower Palace? I would thank the heavens if they didn't come looking for me, whereas going to look for them would be like courting death. As for the founding emperor's token, I'll be heading to the ancient battlefield soon. Can I mobilize the guards of the empire to head to the ancient battlefield with me?" So, They are no different than pieces of scrap metal to me, and they'll only be put to the best use in your hands. After she received the 2 command tokens, Xianxia gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You must come back alive. Otherwise, I'll take the treasures you gave me and marry another man." Yang Yi was speechless. Such a threat is truly extraordinarily great. Yang Yi shook his head, and then he flipped his palm. The 2 Earth rank treasures he obtained from killing Qin Yuran and Li Xianjun appeared in his palm. He said, "Take these 2 things as well. Don't refuse, because the finances needed to establish a power that can go against the Flower Palace is absolutely not something you can bear. I'll craft some talismans for you during this month of time. I'm unable to help you in any other aspect. The only thing I can do is provide financial assistance to you." Xianxia smiled sweetly as she received the Earth rank treasures, and then she said, "Why would I refuse? I'm working for you right now, so you naturally have to resolve the issue of funding." Yang Yi smiled as well, and then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, "Is your mother all right?" Xianxia restrained her smile and nodded before she said, "Because of you, her position in the palace is merely inferior to the highest-ranking imperial concubines. Moreover, my status has improved greatly as well. Presently, the treatment I receive isn't inferior to any prince or princess. In short, little brother, all of this is because of you. So, how do you think big sister should repay you? Should I devote my body to you? Pledge your body to me? That's something that can be considered." Xianxia was stunned, and then she roared with laughter. As she roared with laughter, the ample peaks on her chest started shaking, and the sight of this caused Yang Yi to shudder slightly. Yang Yi suppressed the feelings in his heart before he flipped his palm, and the 2 high-rank technique talismans that were part of the rewards from the Ascension rankings had appeared in his palm. He passed them to her and said, "Don't auction off these high-rank technique talismans. Keep them to protect yourself." Xianxia stopped laughing. She gazed at Yang Yi for a short while before she shook her head and sighed in the end. She said, "Little brother, you have a resolute and decisive character, but you have a lethal flaw. You don't hold back at all once you trust someone. After all, the thing that's easiest to change in the world is the hearts of people. So, no matter who it is, even if it's towards your loved ones, you should hold back a little, understand?" Yang Yi smiled, and then he said, "Don't worry. I know who to trust and who not to trust." Indeed, the number of people Yang Yi trusted in this world could be counted with a single hand. Xianxia glanced at him and didn't continue on this topic. She said, "I'll gather information related to the ancient battlefield and devil race in the next few days, and I'll contact you when I'm done. Besides that, don't try to contact me yourself and don't head to the Immortal Indulgence Pavilion. After all, countless powers have targeted you, and I don't want the things I established with great pains to be exposed because of you." Yang Yi nodded to display his understanding. Xianxia left, and she left with some of the treasures he gathered in the Grand Myriad Mountains. In Yang Ye's opinion, besides combat techniques and sword-type treasures, all other treasures were of no use. Yang Yi shook his head, withdrew the spatial ring Li Si gave him, and then glanced through the treasures within it. Yang Yi was instantly delighted when he saw the Earth rank treasure within it because it was a sword. After the battle with Yuan Tong, Yang Yi noticed that a flaw of the sword chest, and it was that the swords within it were of too inferior quality. If all the 36 swords within it were Earth rank swords, then not to mention Yuan Tong, even 10 Yuan Tongs would be unable to resist its might once it was enhanced by sword intent. However, it wasn't that easy to transform those 36 swords into Earth rank swords. Even though it was extremely difficult, it wasn't a hopeless cause. Because with the mysterious tiny vortex and Yang Ye's own wealth, gathering 36 Earth rank swords was only a matter of time. On the other hand, the Earth rank technique was a palm technique called Star Drop Palm. Supposedly, its might could make the stars in the sky fall to the earth. Yang Yi naturally didn't believe it because not to mention an Earth rank technique, even a Heaven rank technique was unable to make a star fall from the sky. However, Yang Yi was considerably satisfied with this technique because while its might was inferior to the Dragon Breaker, it had a benefit, which was the difficulty to cultivate it wasn't as terrifying as the Dragon Breaker. The Dragon Breaker had 3 levels. With the strength of Yang Ye's physical body and coupled with Elder Mu's guidance, he'd merely cultivated it to the first level. Even Yang Yi couldn't help but say that the difficulty of cultivating it was truly abnormal. Besides the dark treasure and combat technique, there were 100 top-grade energy stones. If it were ordinary energy stones, then Yang Yi would naturally not attach any importance to them. However, they were top-grade energy stones, so even Yang Yi had no choice but to value them. After all, according to the market value of things, a single top-grade energy stone was equivalent to 1,000 energy stones. Moreover, it was a treasure that could rarely be purchased readily. 100 top-grade energy stones were equivalent to 100,000 energy stones. So, when these 100 top-grade energy stones were included in his existing wealth, then it could be said that even some Exalt realm experts weren't as wealthy as Yang Yi. In short, Yang Yi was very satisfied with the rewards of the Ascension rankings, because these rewards could greatly improve his strength, and what he needed now was exactly to ceaselessly improve his strength. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly turned around and looked behind him. Xianxia had suddenly appeared there. When he thought about how this woman before him hadn't hesitated to make a move against the palace master of the Flower Palace earlier, Yang Ye's heart felt warm, and he said, "I thought you'd return to the Sword Sect." Xianxia shook her head slightly. She pondered deeply for a short while before she said, "I'm very sorry for what the Sword Sect did to you. That has nothing to do with you." Yang Yi smiled as he said, "You are you, and the Sword Sect is the Sword Sect. Even though the Sword Sect betrayed me, you've never done so. My feelings towards you have never changed. I don't have the strength to change a lot of things now, but I guarantee that such a day will come. At that time, I'll head to the Sword Sect to look for you. I guarantee that it won't be too long from now." Xianxia stared at Yang Yi for a short while before she said, "I'll be waiting for you in the Sword Sect." As soon as she finished speaking, Xianxia's figure flashed and transformed into a ray of green light that vanished on the horizon. Xianxia had just left when Taoist Zue suddenly appeared where Xianxia stood just moments ago. A wisp of regret flashed in Taoist Zue's eyes as he gazed at Yang Yi, and then he said, "Kid, I'll be frank because it's pointless to say anything now. I came looking for you because I hope you'll return the Azure Sword to the Sword Sect." Yang Yi laughed with self-ridicule and said, "Senior, do I even have the qualifications to refuse in front of you?" As soon as he finished speaking, the Azure Sword appeared in his hand. Right at this moment, it suddenly shook before it transformed into its sword spirit. The little girl glanced at Taoist Zue before she said, "Geezer, I want to go with him." Her tone was indisputable. Taoist Zue shook his head and said, "Going with him will only harm him. A first heaven realm profounder possessing a Tao artifact. At that time, it would just be the Flower Palace and Origin School that go after him. He's utterly unable to take control of you with his current strength. Moreover, every single time he forcefully utilizes you will harm his meridians, and he'll be crippled after a few more times. Geezer, those are all excuses." The little girl stared at Taoist Zue with a hostile gaze and said, "Don't think that you can deceive me just because I'm a sword spirit. At the bottom of it all, you just don't want a Tao artifact of the Sword Sect to fall into the hands of an outsider, right?" Taoist Zue shook his head and didn't speak further. With a wave of his right hand, the Azure Sword instantly transformed into its form as a sword before he forcefully put it away in his spatial ring. After that, he glanced at Yang Yi, and he seemed to want to say something yet didn't speak in the end. He just flashed and vanished on the spot. Yang Yi took a deep breath when he saw Taoist Zue leave, and a cold glow flashed in his eyes. Even though Yang Yi had come to participate in the Ascension rankings for Xianxia and his mother's sakes, it was the Sword Sect that obtained all the benefits. However, once the Sword Sect obtained the benefits, it didn't just refuse to protect him from the Flower Palace, it even took the Azure Sword back. It was naturally impossible for Yang Yi to not feel infuriated. However, he knew that anger was pointless. What could he do if he was furious and displeased? His strength was too weak in the end. The Sword Sect, the Flower Palace, the Ghost Sect, the Origin School. Yang Yi laughed coldly. He intended to repay all of them for everything they'd done to him. As it was said, what goes around comes around. After he left the square outside the Imperial Palace, Yang Yi headed to the Talisman Masters Association. He'd never had any resentment towards the Talisman Masters Association and his master, Lin Shan. Because since the very beginning, if it wasn't for his master, Lin Shan, then he, Yang Yi, would have probably died at the hands of the Flower Palace a very long time ago. Especially Little Yao. If he didn't have Lin Shan, then Little Yao would probably be unable to grow up in a good environment like she was right now. Even though the Talisman Masters Association had abandoned him because of the pressure it suffered from the Dark Beast Empire, it had never betrayed him. Conversely, he'd obtained plenty of benefits from it but had never done anything for the association or his master. Yang Yi wasn't a selfish person, so he still took Lin Shan as his master. In the room, Lin Shan gazed at Yang Yi as he said, "Do you resent me?" Yang Yi shook his head. He stretched out his hand to rub Little Yao's head as he said, "I did a little at the very beginning. However, I don't anymore. Since the beginning, Master and the Talisman Masters Association have done a great deal for me." Lin Shan gazed at Yang Yi for a short while, and when he noticed that Yang Yi didn't seem to be faking it, he sighed lightly and said, "The Talisman Masters Association is a collective. Everyone is extremely united at most times. However, this is only limited to instances when outsiders intend to bring harm to the interests of the entire association. All of us really look favorably upon your natural talent. However, your martial uncle by Shan, and I aren't able to represent the entire association. If the interests of those old fellows are harmed, then the entire association would probably fall into internal strife. This is exactly the reason why your martial uncle and I didn't stop you from leaving the association." Yang Yi smiled and said, "I understand. I came to the association this time because there's something I want to ask of Master." Lin Shan glanced at Little Yao and said, "Is it Yaoer?" Yang Yi nodded. "Don't worry. No one can harm her with me by her side," Lin Shan guaranteed. Yang Yi bowed to Lin Shan when he heard this because this was exactly what he wanted to hear. After accompanying Little Yao and Baoer for a few days, Yang Yi started to gather the spirit herbs that Elder Mu asked him to gather. With Lin Shan's help, he'd gathered all the materials without encountering any difficulty. After he finished gathering the spirit herbs and medicinal herbs, Yang Yi bid his farewells to Lin Shan and headed below Death Abyss. Even though Yang Yi had won in the battle with Yuan Tong, it allowed him to realize his insufficiencies. After all, if he hadn't utilized the tiny vortex and the Dao artifact, and if he had merely relied on his own combat instinct and sword techniques, then the outcome of the battle was unpredictable. Moreover, according to the founding emperor, the youths from the devil race that he would encounter at the ancient battlefield were much more monstrous geniuses than Yuan Tong. So, he had to improve his strength as soon as possible, especially his physical body. If he hadn't relied on his extremely formidable physical body during the battle with Yuan Tong, then he would absolutely not dare to fight Yuan Tong in close-quartered combat, because Yuan Tong's combat instinct was truly terrifying, especially when Yuan Tong had comprehended both battle intent and fist intent. Under such circumstances, an ordinary physical body would be utterly unable to endure a single punch from Yuan Tong. In short, he had numerous insufficiencies. So, he'd headed to the Death Abyss to look for Elder Mu again. Even though he didn't know what this mysterious old man wanted him to do in the future, Elder Mu was the only one who could help him now. So, he had no other choice. Outside Elder Mu's cottage, Elder Mu supported himself with the walking stick. He gazed at Yang Yi and grinned before he said, "You obtained the first position on the Ascension rankings?" "It was only luck." Yang Yi nodded, and then he described the battle between him and Yuan Tong. After a short while, Elder Mu nodded lightly and said, "You really were lucky." Even though Yuan Tong was said to be the quasi-martial emperor, he hadn't comprehended the heart of the strong. If he'd comprehended it, then you would probably be unable to defeat him even if you utilized that Dao artifact. Ha! The martial god. After such an existence that could become the martial god finally appeared in the southern territory, he was destroyed at your hands. Yang Yi shook his head and didn't say anything. No matter if it was the martial god or the sword emperor, he wasn't interested at all. Since the very beginning, he only had a single objective: and that was to rescue his mother from the Flower Palace. Elder Mu suddenly asked, "If I'm not wrong, then you're probably heading to the ancient battlefield next?" Yang Yi was stunned, and then he said, "How did you know, Elder Mu?" Elder Mu smiled lightly, and then he revealed a serious expression and said, "The ancient battlefield is said to be the grave of geniuses. No matter how much of a genius one was, it's possible to be buried there, because there's never a lack of monstrous geniuses there. At that place, there's no one that's the most monstrous genius because there's always an even more monstrous genius. Right? Even if you've attained the enlightened sword heart and initial stage of sword intent, you can only be considered as average there. The members of the devil race are really so terrifying?" asked Yang Yi with a low voice. Elder Mu shook his head, and then he raised his head to look up into the sky as he said slowly, "Looks like you don't have a good understanding of the ancient battlefield. The reason it's called the ancient battlefield isn't merely because it's the battlefield of the humans and dark beasts against the devil race." When he spoke up to hear, Elder Mu suddenly turned to look at Yang Yi before he said, "Do you know how large this continent is?" Yang Yi was stunned, and then he shook his head. What a joke. How could he possibly know how large the continent was? The furthest he'd been was only the Grand Myriad Mountains. Elder Mu spoke slowly. During the ancient times, this continent was called Profounder Continent. One day, a precious treasure suddenly appeared on Profounder Continent, and this treasure was called the Boundless Sea of Energy. For the sake of seizing this precious treasure, two top experts of Profounder Continent engaged each other in battle. Both of them were the supreme experts of that time, and any one of them could shatter a star with a single strike of the palm. After 100 years of fighting, their battle had caused Profounder Continent to shatter apart into 9 territories. They shattered an entire continent. Such strength. Yang Yi suppressed the shock in his heart, and then he asked, "Elder Mu, what you mean is that our southern territory is one of those 9 territories?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "The extreme north, that is the other side of the Heaven Tower mountain range, is actually another territory, and it's called the Devil Territory. Since it used to be a single continent, then why has no one from the other territories come to the Southern Territory?" asked Yang Yi. Elder Mu sighed and said, "Because every single territory was sealed off by the supreme strength of an expert. For example, the reason the Heaven Tower mountain range is able to obstruct the devil race isn't that it's impossible to scale, and it's instead because that expert's seal resides there. Then why are the youths of the devil race able to climb over the mountain range and arrive at the Southern Territory?" asked Yang Yi. Elder Mu chuckled and said, "There are always people of exceptional ability emerging throughout the generations. Even though he was extremely formidable, that expert has perished in the end. On the other hand, even though the strength of the devil race's Devil Exalt is inferior to that expert, the gap between them isn't huge. So, he has been weakening the seal on Heaven Tower mountain range, and that's why countless youths from the devil race can come to the Southern Territory from the Devil Territory. What Elder Mu means that it isn't just the devil region, and the seal on the various other regions sealed by that experts has started to weaken as well. In other words, it wouldn't just be the youths from the devil race that will be making an appearance at the ancient battlefield, and the extraordinary geniuses of the other territories will be there as well," asked Yang Yi in a low voice. A wisp of praise flashed in Elder Mu's eyes, and then he nodded lightly. Yang Ye's heart sank when he heard this because the founding emperor hadn't told him that the experts of the other territories would be appearing at the ancient battlefield. Did he do it unintentionally or intentionally? If it was intentional, then what was his intention? Elder Mu suddenly said, "Actually, I don't approve of you going to the ancient battlefield, because you're merely at the first heaven realm now, so your cultivation is too low. It's unrealistic for you to think of surmounting realms of cultivation to do battle there. After all, those who are able to appear on the ancient battlefield are monstrous geniuses amongst monstrous geniuses. Even though you're a monstrous genius as well, as I've said before, your cultivation is a bit too low." When he spoke up to hear, Elder Mu suddenly changed the topic and said, "However, that place is an opportunity for you to become stronger as well, because fighting the experts from the other territories is very beneficial to you. Moreover, There's a treasure there that you must obtain in order to temper your body into a state that's stronger than the physical bodies of dark beasts and the devil race. What treasure? Asked Xianxia. Elder Mu smiled, and then he opened his right hand. A flame instantly appeared on his palm, and then he said, "There are some precious treasures in the world, and these precious treasures form a spirit of their own after experiencing the baptism of countless years, just like this nether ghost flames of mine. Even though it seemed like a mere strand of flames, it actually has its own intelligence." When he spoke up to hear, Elder Mu flicked his finger, and the ghastly white-colored nether ghost flames suddenly attached itself onto Xianxia's hidden sword. Xianxia was stunned when he saw the hidden sword being completely enveloped by the nether ghost flames. He didn't know what Elder Mu was trying to show him, so he raised his head to look at Elder Mu. Elder Mu grinned and said, "Try waving your sword now." When he heard this, Xianxia hesitated briefly before he drew his sword and slashed. In an instant, a strand of sword chi shot out explosively from the hidden sword. However, it was unlike the past because the nether ghost flames was actually attached to the sword chi. In other words, this strand of sword chi Xianxia executed was one that carried fire. This was extremely shocking. Bang! An enormous tree over 30 m away was instantly blasted apart by that strand of sword chi. However, the following scene stunned Xianxia on the spot, because the tree that exploded apart had actually mysteriously transformed into nothingness as if it had never existed there. When has my sword chi become so formidable? Even 4th level sword intent is unable to accomplish that. Xianxia was stunned, and then he gazed at Elder Mu and said, "It's because of the nether ghost flames?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "The nether ghost flames hasn't been subdued by you, so its true might is far from just that. If you subdue it, then not only will it temper your body all day and night, you can even utilize it just like how I attached it to your sword chi just now. Moreover, not only can it be attached to your sword chi, it can even be attached to your sword. So, if your opponent's dark treasure isn't of sufficient quality, then it would probably be incinerated into nothingness by the nether ghost flames before it can even approach your sword." Xianxia gulped down a mouthful of saliva, and then he said, "Elder Mu, you mean that you intend to give the nether ghost flames to me?" Elder Mu nodded. Xianxia took a deep breath, and then he suppressed the excitement in his heart and said with a puzzled tone, "Why? There was no free food in the world. Moreover, Elder Mu and Xianxia were neither related nor friends. Even though they were like master and disciple by way of the guidance Elder Mu had provided him, they weren't actual master and disciple. So, why would Elder Mu give him such a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth? Xianxia didn't possess such great charism to warrant this." Elder Mu glanced at Xianxia before he sighed lightly, and then he said, "Your current strength is too weak, and I don't have much time left, so you have to improve your strength as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you'll be utterly unable to accomplish what I want you to do." "You don't have much time?" Xianxia frowned and said, "Elder Mu, what do you mean?" Elder Mu shook his head and said, "You'll find out about all of that in the future. In short, you must improve your strength as quickly as possible. Not only for the sake of your mother but for your own sake as well. Because the Southern Territory is about to fall into disorder. Don't ask me what I mean. You'll naturally understand when the time comes." Xianxia shook his head helplessly when he heard this. Is Elder Mu trying to arouse my curiosity on purpose? With his strength, can anyone even harm him? Moreover, what did he mean when he said the Southern Territory is about to fall into disorder? Xianxia shook his head, stopped thinking about it, and then he asked, "Elder Mu, you said there's a treasure I need in the ancient battlefield. What is it? How should I search for it?" After he witnessed the terrifying might of the nether ghost flames, Xianxia grew even more curious towards that treasure that Elder Mu had spoken about. "Don't be impatient." Elder Mu smiled, and then he walked slowly towards the bath barrel. After that, he flipped his palm, and the nether ghost flames instantly entered the bath barrel. In an instant, the water within the barrel started burning. At the same time, the temperature in the surroundings instantly rose, and it was to the point that Xianxia was able to clearly sense the terrifying temperature within the bath barrel even if he was over 10 m away from it. Elder Mu turned to look at Yang Yi before he said, "Go on in." Yang Ye's expression instantly became unsightly when he heard this. Even though it wasn't his first time, Yang Yi was able to sense that the temperature within the bath barrel couldn't be compared to the past at all. Your physical body has arrived at a certain level, so it's utterly impossible to improve it effectively with just the medicinal herbs that you gathered. Only by greatly stimulating your body with the nether ghost flames and supplementing it with the medicinal herbs would your physical body be able to obtain an obvious increase. Moreover, if you want to subdue the nether ghost flames, then the first step is to endure its heat, said Elder Mu. Yang Yi smiled bitterly. No wonder there are practically no body refiners in the entire Southern Territory now. There are probably very few people in the world that are able to endure the process of body refinement. Yang Yi took a deep breath, stopped hesitating, and then jumped into the barrel. So long as he was able to improve his strength, then what was a little bit of pain? Bang! As soon as he entered it, the clothes Yang Yi wore had transformed into ash. At the same time, the skin throughout his body instantly turned crimson red as if it had been cooked. Moreover, his veins had started to bulge up all over his face and neck, causing his appearance to seem especially terrifying. Pain. Extreme pain. Pain that struck deep into the bones. This was what Yang Yi felt at this moment. Even though he was mentally prepared, he still couldn't help but almost be unable to restrain himself from leaping out from the bath barrel when he felt the terrifying temperature of the nether ghost flames. However, fortunately, he was able to endure it in the end. There was a price to pay if one wanted to become strong. Scarlet red blisters started to gradually appear on Yang Ye's skin, and the blisters were around the size of a thumb. These blisters densely covered his entire body. It could be said that Yang Ye's current appearance was something that could even terrify a demon. Elder Mu nodded lightly when he saw these blisters, and then he tossed the spirit herbs Yang Yi gathered into the bath barrel, causing some green dots to gradually appear within the water. Under Elder Mu's control, those green dots surged towards Yang Yi. The blisters on his body popped apart when these green dots came into contact with Yang Ye's skin. Pain. Pain that was even greater than before. Yang Yi almost let out a shrill cry. Fortunately, right at this moment, the golden profound energy within his body had started to flow slowly, and it flowed slowly through the meridians in his entire body. With the incessant recovery provided by the golden profound energy, Yang Yi instantly felt much better. Time passed slowly. 10 days later, Yang Yi had gotten completely accustomed to the temperature of the nether ghost flames. Of course, this temperature was its temperature while it was under Elder Mu's control, and if it was the nether ghost flame's true temperature, then not to mention Yang Ye's current physical body. Even the physical body of an exalt rank dark beast would probably be instantly transformed into nothingness. Elder Mu, who stood by the bath barrel, suddenly gestured with his right hand, and the ghastly white ocean of flames within the bath barrel had instantly converged into a small clump of flames that appeared on his palm. A wisp of a complicated expression flashed in Elder Mu's eyes as he gazed at the tiny clump of flames on his palm. He said, "I obtained this nether ghost flame by chance at the ghost territory. I originally had no intention to subdue it because while it possessed intelligence of its own, it was merely at a juvenile stage. Nether ghost flame at the juvenile stage is truly useless to me, but it was too much of a waste to just leave it there. However, I never expected that it would still be at the juvenile stage after being by my side for over 1,000 years. Now, you're going to benefit from it instead," Yang Yi said with astonishment when he heard this. "Elder Mu, this nether ghost flame is merely at the juvenile stage?" Elder Mu nodded and said, "It was already mature, then I wouldn't give it to you. Of course, if it has already matured, then it would be utterly impossible to subdue it with your strength. All right, you've gotten used to its temperature. So open your mouth and allow it to enter your dantian." "Enter my dantian?" Yang Yi was shocked and said, "Elder Mu, even though my body has gotten used to its temperature, the insides of my body are still comparatively weaker. If I allow it to enter my body, then I would probably be instantly incinerated into nothingness. The treasures of the heavens and the earth contain terrifying energy within them, and just approaching them would be life-threatening to ordinary people. On the other hand, subduing them is extremely dangerous. Even though it's dangerous, if you're able to subdue it, then the assistance it provides you wouldn't be inferior to your sword intent at all. Of course, if you're afraid of danger, then just forget it. Elder Mu spoke indifferently. Xianxia smiled bitterly, and then he said, Elder Mu, let's begin. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia had opened his mouth. Elder Mu nodded lightly, and then he flicked his finger, causing the flame on his palm to instantly fly into Xianxia's throat. At the moment this happened, Xianxia's expression immediately became colorful. One would definitely understand how Xianxia felt right now if one had tried to drink boiling water. No matter what, the pain from the outside of the body was impossible to be compared to the pain that came from within the body, because all the organs and structures within the body were extremely weak and fragile. So, at this moment, Xianxia's expression had started to warp from the pain he experienced. After the tongue of flames had entered Xianxia's body, it seemed like a playful child that played over here for a moment and stopped over there for a while. Everywhere it passed was completely scorched black. However, fortunately, the golden profound energy within him was ceaselessly repairing his body. Otherwise, Xianxia would have probably taken his last breath by now. In next to no time, it had arrived at Xianxia's dantian. Xianxia heaved a sigh of relief and was just about to utilize the method Elder Mu taught him to take control of the nether ghost flame when it suddenly transformed into a fiery ray of light that entered the tiny vortex. Xianxia was stunned. After it entered the tiny vortex, it once again acted as it had when it had just arrived within Xianxia's body. It became a curious child that moved about all over the place. Suddenly, it seemed to have noticed something, and then it moved towards the outside of the tiny vortex. However, right at this moment, it suddenly froze stiff on the spot as if an invisible force had trapped it. The little tongue of flames slowly started to tremble while it grew dimmed as well. It seemed as if it would be extinguished at any moment. Moreover, it slowly started trembling even more intensely as if it had encountered something extremely terrifying. Suddenly, the invisible force vanished. However, even though it had vanished, the tongue of flames was still unable to leave the tiny vortex. After the invisible force vanished, the little tongue of flames floated about on the spot, and then it felt that it was safe and started moving slowly towards the pool of profound energy. It seemed to be very interested in the violet mink, and it floated about around the violet-colored barrier of light that enveloped the violet mink. Right when it was about to come into contact with the violet barrier of light that enveloped the violet mink, the invisible force appeared once more. After a short while, the little tongue of flames had moved away from the little fellow. On the other hand, the king-rank dark beasts within Xianxia's vortex dantian had astounded expressions as they gazed at the tongue of flames. All of these king-rank dark beasts felt both curious and fearful towards this newcomer because their intuition told them that this tongue of flames was extremely dangerous. As he watched the actions of the tongue of flames in the space within the tiny vortex, Xianxia was slightly amused. Now, he believed that the tongue of flames was at the juvenile stage. He stopped hesitating and started to subdue it according to the method provided by Elder Mu. The tongue of flames was naturally unwilling to allow itself to be subdued, and it resisted Xianxia. It started to move about incessantly within the tiny vortex. In the end, it transformed into an ocean of flames. However, as soon as it became an ocean of flames, the invisible force had appeared once more. This time, it wasn't just the little tongue of flames. Even the other king-rank dark beasts there were able to sense the invisible force. At the instant that they sensed the invisible force, all the king-rank dark beasts and the nether ghost flame that had transformed into an ocean of flames had started to tremble. It was a mysterious force that caused even their souls to tremble. All the dark beasts started howling towards the nether ghost flame, as if they were complaining that I had infuriated the mysterious force. On the other hand, the nether ghost flame seemed to be aware that it had made a huge mistake, and it hurriedly transformed back into its previous state. When Xianxia witnessed this scene, he hurriedly started to subdue it. This time, even though the little tongue of flames had still tried to struggle, it was clearly not as intense as before. After around an hour of time, Xianxia opened his eyes, and he revealed an undisguised expression of pleasant surprise. "You succeeded?" Elder Mu asked in a light voice. Yang Yi nodded with a smile on his face. With a flick of his finger, a strand of ghastly white flames appeared on the tip of his finger. As he gazed at the strand of flames, Yang Yi felt very fortunate in his heart. If the tongue of flame hadn't gone into the tiny vortex by itself, if it hadn't gone to disturb the violet mink, if it hadn't acted wildly in the tiny vortex, if the tiny vortex hadn't become infuriated. In short, if the tongue of flames hadn't courted death, then Yang Yi would probably have to suffer a great deal in order to subdue this wild and unyielding nether ghost flame. It was even to the extent that subduing it successfully might even become a problem. A wisp of surprise flashed in Elder Mu's eyes when he saw the little tongue of flames on the tip of Yang Ye's finger. He knew exactly how terrifying the nether ghost flame was. In his opinion, Yang Yi would at least require half a month in order to subdue the nether ghost flame. However, to his surprise, Yang Yi hadn't even used 2 hours to subdue it. Elder Mu glanced deeply at Yang Yi, and then he said, "Now that you've subdued the nether ghost flames, I'll use the remaining time to teach you how to utilize it. Right, it's best that you don't rashly expose the nether ghost flame in public. After all, it's extraordinarily attractive and tempting even to spirit realm and exalt realm experts. Be sure to always remember that." Yang Yi nodded. The nether ghost flame was a precious treasure of the heavens and the earth. Coupled with the terrifying ability and might it possessed, it would be impossible for those extraordinary experts to not desire it. "Now, try controlling the nether ghost flames," said Elder Mu. Yang Yi grinned because he'd wanted to test his might for some time now. Earlier, it was Elder Mu controlling the nether ghost flames and attaching it to the hidden sword. Yet now it would be he who had to control the nether ghost flames. The significance of these two events was completely different.